All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're right at 10 a.m. We have people in the room. We also have people online. So just a couple housekeeping notes. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to raise them right away. We will also have time at the end for discussion and questions and answers as well. For those of you online, go ahead and type your questions into the chat function, and we have LJ here in the room who will raise those questions and repeat them for the room. My name is K Lauer. I'm a proposal manager with the Research Development Unit in KED, and I will be going over the content today. Before we get started, I do want to plug just a few things. So the first is funding.asu.edu. This is Research Development's website. You can come here to find content that we cover in today's session, as well as content that is covered in other workshop sessions. And you can just find lots of information that's really useful for research development here. So this is also one of many workshops in a workshop series. Our next workshop is coming up on September 19th. It's going to cover budgeting. And then in December, we're going to have a second USAID workshop that's going to dive into solicitations and common proposal elements that you might find. Next up, I want to plug Research Academy, which is hopefully where you found this event. You can find different trainings and events here, and you can register for them, have them populate to your calendar, etc. And then finally, hopefully this is a website that we all know and love. This is Research Administration, where there's tons of different resources here for you to just kind of explore. You can find out who can help you to develop proposals and to implement research. Works a little bit better. I also got a cold over the weekend, so if I have to pause because my voice is getting scratchy or I lose my breath, just know I got a cold. All right, so we're going to dive right into the workshop content. First, we're going to cover just a brief introduction to USAID. We're going to talk about how you can go about exploring funding opportunities. We're going to discuss the different types of USAID awards that you could receive. We're also going to talk about the difference between a prime versus a sub-role. Just a quick definition of that: a prime would be a leading organization for proposal and project implementation. A sub, you would be part of that lead organization's team. And then we're also going to cover resources that are available at ASU to help you plan and actually implement the projects. Okay, so to dive in, the mission of USAID is twofold. It is to promote American values abroad and also to help improve lives of people abroad. So it's just always good to keep in mind that it has those two goals. USAID works in 5 different regions. Let's see if I can remember them. We have Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, Europe and Eurasia, and Asia. They have offices in DC and then also offices all around the world. USAID divides its work into different core focus areas that they call sectors. So we have the U.S. Global Development Lab. This is going to be a place where you're going to find a lot of university-specific opportunities. We have agriculture and food security, democracy, human rights and governance, economic growth and trade, education, environment and global climate change, gender equality and women's empowerment, global health, water and sanitation, and working in crises and conflict areas. A lot of the solicitations that you might find or opportunities that you might apply to could be in just one sector, but they could also be across multiple sectors. Okay, so we want to talk about what USAID is, and this is from the lens of how do they differ or how are they similar to other federal sponsors that researchers at universities might typically pursue. So they're very impact driven. They're going to want to count all of the results from your different activities and roll that up to demonstrate their impact. They're decentralized in the sense that you could be receiving solicitations or finding opportunities from USAID in India, USAID in South America, USAID in Egypt or Malawi. They're overseas. The work that they do is going to be primarily overseas. They're implementation focused, so they're going to be doing activities, implementing interventions, different activities, trainings in local communities with local organizations. And finally, they're increasing their opportunities for universities, which is one of the reasons why we're here today and why ASU is actually pursuing more and more USAID funding. Okay, so what USAID is not, again, in the lens of how they differ from other federal sponsors. They're not a sponsor for career development, so there are other sponsors who might offer funding for students, funding for postdocs, funding for early career, mid-career, mature career. USAID does not offer those types of streams of funding. They are not a sponsor for basic research. Again, their focus is mostly applied and implementation focused. And finally, they're not really a sponsor for research conducted in your lab. There may be some work that you do for USAID that is conducted here on campus, but it's not a typical funder to buy new equipment for your lab and to kind of continue that funding stream for your lab. All right, next up, we're going to go to exploring funding opportunities, and I'll just pause to see if there's any questions at all. All right. So I already talked about one way to start getting some knowledge about what USAID wants to fund. That is the different sectors. So I encourage you to click through those sectors on the website. It'll give you a little bit more information on the different technical areas that USAID is interested in funding. The second step would be to visit the mission websites and to take a look at the country strategies. So again, you can go to the USAID website, click on the tab that's titled Where We Work, and you can look at the different missions and go to their websites. This is going to give you some overview of what's happening in that country, what's being prioritized in that country, and what sectors are being focused on. Next up, you can actually click into the country strategies. These are country-level, 5-year strategy planning documents. This is going to give you a deeper dive into what USAID is prioritizing for funding in those countries. It's going to give you an overview of who the stakeholders are in the country, what specifics they're looking at funding. It can kind of help you plan out where you can expect to see solicitations come for those different technical areas and geographic focuses. Okay, next step, once you've kind of gotten that background knowledge, is to take a look at the USAID business forecast. You can search this online. There's a number of different filters that you can apply to narrow the search results. You can also download it as an Excel spreadsheet. The pro of that would be that you have all of the information there at your fingertips, and you can do your own sorting and deleting of things that are not relevant to you. This is what a business forecast opportunity could look like. So you're going to have the name of the opportunity, you're going to have the operating unit and the sector. You're going to have the anticipated solicitation release date, the anticipated award date, the total estimated budget. You also might get lucky and actually have some detail, this paragraph down here at the bottom that gives you some detail on the opportunity. One thing to note here is all of these different opportunities are going to have different levels of detail in them. Some of them might be very detailed. Some of them might not even have an anticipated solicitation release date. So it's a good thing to always be checking back in. They do update it rolling and on an ongoing basis. And you can also add a filter just to look for updates as well. Okay, this brings me to my first introduction of ASUID. This is ASU International Development. We do have a couple of folks from this unit in the room today. They do business development and support faculty and units across campus to put together proposals for USAID and implement the projects. They have a twice monthly meeting called the Business Development Pipeline Meeting, where they review opportunities that show up in the USAID business forecast, and they discuss how we want to pursue those as business opportunities. So here are the contacts. You can see that they all have different sectors that they focus on. So if you ever want to pursue an opportunity or get some more information on an opportunity, I encourage you to follow up with them. Okay, so once the solicitation actually goes live, it's going to come out either on grants.gov or on FedBizOps. Grants.gov is for assistance, mostly for grants. FedBizOps is going to be for acquisition and contracts. Most of you are probably familiar with these websites. If you're not, I encourage you to go to them. Spend a little bit of time playing around with the search function because it can be a little bit confusing, and it just takes a little bit of skill to get pretty good at it. This is also where amendments and answers to questions and answers are going to be published as well. Okay, so then this is going to bring us next to understanding different types of USAID awards. Okay, so we have acquisition and assistance. That's the first thing I'm going to go over. So acquisition is the government purchasing a good or a service, whereas assistance is the US government providing funding for a program that serves the public good. So there's a little bit of nuance there. Acquisition is going to come out as an RFP, a request for proposals, whereas assistance is going to come out as an RFA, request for applications. So this is a non-exhaustive list of different mechanisms that USAID uses. They use many, many more, but this is just kind of a quick overview of some that we see more often than others here at ASU. So the first one's indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. This is commonly referred to as an IDIQ. And as you can kind of tell from the title, the government uses this when they are not sure of the exact nature and of the exact scope of work that they're going to require under this. So they're typically very large dollar. They typically have very large teams. The idea being that you want to have all expertise available to answer anything that could come later on through these funding opportunities. They do usually have a low probability of win, though that doesn't mean you should not pursue them. And they also usually require pretty low levels of inputs from ASU. So we might give the lead organization personnel resumes, which is pretty self-explanatory, or something called a skills matrix or a short-term technical assistance matrix. And those would include a list of skills and expertise that ASU would bring to the team. So usually it would be a list of experts. We have many here at ASU, about 3,000. So all of those experts that we identify who are interested in being on this bid, we would submit information about them, including their education level, years of experience, and specific expertise. And then this would roll up then into the larger team. And then with IDIQs, the way the funding actually rolls out is once the team has won the IDIQ, that means that they have now won the ability to bid on future task orders. And those task orders are the specific scopes of work tied to actual funding for the work to be implemented. So it's kind of a two-step process to get to the real dollar funding. Moving down to grants, we're all pretty familiar with what grants are and how those work. The key detail here is that USAID is not substantially involved in these grants. And that differs from cooperative agreements where you might see really heavy involvement from USAID in both planning and implementation of the project or the activity. One example of what this heavy involvement could look like would be USAID requiring that we hire personnel for the activity, and this would oftentimes be external to ASU personnel. And for personnel positions that USAID identifies as key, they would have a role in approving those personnel, and once they are approved, we would have to get their permission in order to fire and replace those personnel. So that's just one example of how involved they can be. Another one here, Leader with Associate Award. So this would be a leader award for an activity that other USAID offices could then issue separate associate awards to that same person who won the leader award without having to open up a new competitive bidding process. ASU has won a couple of those in the past. We also have annual program statements. As the name implies, they're usually open for about a year or released on an annual basis. These can be smaller dollar, but they are not always smaller dollar. They're usually at the country level, and they can be broader in scope. So I've seen some before that are again at the country level, and then under that APS, there's 5 different areas that you could propose programs and apply for. Or I've seen one where the APS will help the country office achieve 2 different objectives, and then it's up to you to then propose the project that would help them achieve those broader objectives. The final one here is the request for information. The key detail here is that it's not tied to funding. Requests for information are used by USAID to solicit feedback and to kind of get a sense of what their implementers could bring to a solicitation that they're thinking about putting out. Even though these are not tied to funding, we do encourage you to still respond to these, simply because it's a way to let USAID know what your skills and expertise are, and it's also a way for you to potentially influence a future solicitation. But again, those are not tied to any funding dollars. Any questions here?
I love this. One interesting thing about USAID versus some of the other agencies is that the institution can put in one award. So whereas, in other agencies, PIs can put in numerous awards, here it really goes to the institution.
Excellent. All right, any other questions? Anything from online? No, okay. All right, so next we're going to dive into prime and sub roles. So a prime is going to be the lead organization. They're going to lead the development of the proposal of the project. They're going to lead the implementation. They're going to be the primary contact with USAID, and they are then going to manage a team of subcontractors. Now, why might a prime organization bring on subcontractors? It's usually because they do not have 100% of the expertise and manpower that is required to implement the project. So they need to build up a team to fill in their gaps. So a sub is one of those teams that helps fill a gap for a larger organization or for the lead organization. You could have a sub role where you're providing support for different activities, and you'd have kind of a set, narrow scope of work within that larger project framework. As a sub, your scope of work could account for 1% of the budget, 10% of the budget, 20, 40% of the budget. It completely depends on the nature of the relationship and the work being done. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so what sort of sub-roles could you play? This slide is up here because we have a lot of faculty across ASU who have successfully found funding by being a sub to prime organizations year after year, project after project. So you could be a subject matter expert. You could be somebody who's lending their expertise on a specific topic to the prime organization. You could be a leader or a designer of activities. So you could help an organization design an intervention, design a specific part of the activity. You could even go to the country and you could help implement that activity. Let's say it's a workshop or a training that takes course over 2 weeks. You could actually travel to that country and help implement it there. You could be a trainer. USAID really prioritizes capacity building and training of local professionals. You're going to see training, I think, in almost every single USAID project. So we've had faculty members be trainers of staff members with other organizations. They've trained police officers, teachers, ministry officials, you name them, USAID has trained them. You could also create a tool. This is the final bullet on my list, but it's not the final role that you could, of course, play. But in creating a tool, you could help an organization create an evaluation tool. You could help an organization create a tool that gathers data that's important to their project. I've seen faculty members develop games before that help train people in certain activities. There's lots of different tools that could be developed for these projects. Another thing, as it relates to this final bullet here, you might already have a tool that you use in your own work that you could help an organization adapt to a local context. So that's also another way of thinking about it. Okay, when you're looking for partners, we would encourage you to think through just a few simple questions. First of all, making sure that their mission and values, of course, align with those of ASU. It's useful to think through if they are a credible USAID implementer. Have they worked with USAID in the past? Or are they brand new to the scene? Do they have the right geographic and programmatic focus for the call? So this is something where if you find an organization that has primarily done their work in South America and they're looking to apply for a project in Asia, it's worth following up and asking a few more questions to understand why they think they can be successful implementing in Asia. And then finally, do they have a strong track record of quality delivery? So do they have a strong track record of what's called past performance? Is USAID pleased with how they've implemented past projects? If USAID is not pleased, they may not be a good partner for you to pursue. And again, I'm going to call on ASUID here. ASUID can really be a helpful resource in answering these questions, in part because they know a lot of the major implementers in DC, and also because they can help you kind of think through and figure out where to get this information. So we'll touch on them again in the resources section. Okay, the final step in this sub versus prime role. Oh, we have a question.
Online. How can we determine past performance of potential partners?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So there are a couple of websites that I can share. They didn't make it into the slides, where you can see who has received past funding in different countries to even get a sense of what those projects are. And then Anne, if you don't mind, I'm just going to call on you. Are there databases where you can look up past performance? There are for some funding mechanisms and not for others.
Well, actually, what we usually do is we make that part of the partnering call. Mm-hmm. We look at the CDCS, the missions website. We see who have done previous programs. We ask around to get the buzz on whether it was a good program or not. Sometimes an incumbent has a natural advantage, but if they did a bad job, then they do not have that advantage. And in the partnering conversations, we ask them what are their past performance. For contracts, they do have contract performance reports which are publicly available. For grants, they don't have that.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question. No problem.
The other question. Vanessa Davis says, thanks, Kelly and Ann. The other question is from the Global Center for Applied Health Research. As a sub, do you have to find a prime, or does the prime seek the sub?
Both. We would recommend that you try and court a prime organization very, very early on. If you see an opportunity in the business forecast that is a year or two out, that's the perfect time to start going after partners. A lot of these teams are formed very early on, and if you don't talk to people early on, they're already going to find somebody else who can fill that role. Now, primes often will come to us. They'll often come to ASUID, kind of as a central point of contact for ASU, and they will say, hey, we think ASU could really help us out here. And then what ASUID does is they go out and they look for faculty who kind of align with that call, then get in touch with those faculty to make those connections. But it's always a two-way street. And I don't know, Anne, if you want to add anything, but it's something that you need to start early, and you cannot depend on them coming to you.
Kellyanne, I couldn't agree more. Starting early is really important. But I would say coming to our office first and telling us you're interested if you find something, because we are constantly involved in activities in DC, meeting partners all the time. We have a big presence there. And I would say one of our challenges is to really find faculty who are willing and able to do the work. So if faculty is willing and able to do the work, we will find the partner. Sometimes I think we're really well qualified for an opportunity, but it doesn't always mesh with faculty's interests. So,
Absolutely. And any more questions from online? Because I have a follow-up answer in this next slide as well. So one of the ways that you can actually start marketing your expertise and your capabilities is through something that is called a capability statement. This is just a brief example of one here. I would recommend that you draft a general capabilities statement that kind of covers your expertise and the different services that you could potentially provide. But when it comes to pursuing a specific solicitation, we actually recommend that you take any information that you have on that solicitation. So maybe you have a draft, maybe you have some information from the country websites or the country strategies, and you actually write the capability statement so it demonstrates how your expertise and how your capabilities are directly responsive to the different scopes of work and tasks that you know will be coming out. And why do we recommend doing this? We recommend doing this that way the partner can receive this document. They can give it a read, a skim, a glance, whatever they have time for, and they can automatically see how you're going to fit into their team. If you make it a struggle for them, if you make it difficult for them to see how they would fit you into their team, they're going to be less likely to reach back out and schedule that follow-up call. So we really recommend really tailoring these to the specific opportunities, and that's just going to make that initial partnering that much easier. So this one, I'm not sure how clear it is, but it kind of breaks down the different tasks that were available for this opportunity that was being pursued, and then matches what ASU can offer in those different, to respond to those different tasks. Another thing to remember here is, again, you might be an individual faculty member or part of a certain center, so you can respond to very specific tasks in these different calls. But there might be somebody else at ASU who could respond to a different task. So if we can work on bringing those different teams together as well and reaching out to other units who could potentially make ASU an even more valuable partner to the prime organization, that's always a really good strategy to take. All right. So next up, we're going to move to ASU resources. So there are plenty of resources across campus that help make the planning and implementation of these international projects a little bit easier. Here's the list, and we'll kind of run through them. So we have ASU International Development, which we've already spoken about a couple of times here. They do have a website that I encourage you to visit. They have a Contact Us button where you can click into that and see who they all have on staff, as well as their contact information. Always feel free to reach out to them. Again, as Ann just said, their main goal is to connect faculty to these different opportunities, and they really want to find faculty who are interested in doing this work. So if you're interested, go ahead and reach out. Next up, we do have our ASU DC office, and ASU ID has 2 of their staff members housed in this office who are sneakily both here in the room today, so they're pulling a trick on us, but normally they're in DC. This is a great physical space, kind of a launch pad into the DC city. And one thing to remember about this is our ASU office is very close to a lot of the prime organizations that we would be pursuing as partners. It's close to their headquarters. It's close to the USAID offices. So this could be a good place if you're ever in DC doing these visits to just kind of come to. I know that you can get office space there when you need it, kind of a temporary desk for a visit. And I'd also encourage you to reach out to Haley and Ann, who will kind of introduce here at the end, and they can also help connect you to different DC partners. Next up, we have ASU Global Operations. This is also a unit of KED. They help do a lot of things. They really help project teams kind of think through the different implications of conducting work abroad. So I'm not going to go over all of these bullets, but I will go over a few. As soon as you get a solicitation in hand, as soon as you know you want to apply for an opportunity, I recommend getting in touch with them. They can help walk you through a pre-award risk assessment where they look at the solicitation and they identify different risks that will be posed both to the project and also to ASU as an institution. If you don't consider these things early on, it could be a roadblock that you cannot overcome later on. They can also help think through budget considerations. In planning these international development projects, there are things that you have to budget for that you've never even thought of before, that you would never come across in a domestic project. So they've seen these things before. They can help you think through what that might be. And then once you identify what you need to budget for, they can also help you get quotes and help you figure out how to budget for those. How to budget for purchasing a vehicle in Malawi versus leasing a vehicle. These are things that you kind of have to start thinking through. The final bullet down here at the bottom, ASU's global footprint. I should have put a coming soon next to this one. Global Operations is working on pulling together one source that you could go to see ASU's footprint worldwide. So this would include projects, partnerships, any other work, travel, anything else that ASU is doing in that country. So for example, if you want to go and conduct a project or apply for a project in Malawi, it would be very useful for you to know what is currently happening in Malawi. You can turn to that team for advice and for guidance. You could leverage some of the existing processes and procedures that have already been established. It could really kind of help jumpstart your project as well. So do keep an eye out for that in the coming months. All right, finally, I'm wrapping back to this website. You can tell how important it is. Even just within the regular research development process, there is incredible amounts of USAID expertise and international project expertise. So for RAs or for faculty who are working with RAs, you may not have worked on a USAID project before, but again, as with any sponsor, your RA is your best resource. And for RAs, if you don't know the answer to a question, you can always email RA help. The people who answer those emails have a wealth of USAID knowledge. And there's also USAID experience and expertise in both the project management office and with the grants and contracts officers as well. So if you reach out, even if your specific person hasn't worked on a USAID award before, they have expertise in their teams that they can turn to get these questions answered. All right, so that's going to bring us to about the end of the content. I'm just going to give you a really brief plug for the next workshop that we're going to be giving on USAID is going to be on December 4th, and this is going to be looking at a USAID solicitation. What are common things that you're going to see? How do they differ from other federal solicitations? And then we're also going to be looking at common proposal elements that you might see that, again, are different than other sponsors that you might have applied to in the past. So I'll open it up for questions now. Any discussions, any questions that you want to raise?
Do any of these have a cost share requirement? Like a lot of my domestic awards have cost share requirements.
Yeah, some of them do. It'll be specific to the particular solicitation. And they'll say in there if cost share is required or if cost share is not required but looked favorably upon. I'd say in the past year we've seen one that's required cost share and a few that have looked favorably upon it.
Okay, so the rule of thumb I've got for domestic ones, if it's 20%, ASU is okay with it. If it's 50%, you've got to try real hard.
Yeah, I've never seen 50%. Okay. I'd say it's usually between 10 and 20. Yeah, 20 would be maximum, 10 would be
pretty manageable. Okay.
Yeah.
And sort of a follow-up question, some of the awards from the military can be cost reimbursement, so they only give you money if you meet your milestones. Does USAID do anything like that?
They do have those. Haley, do you want to jump in and just give a brief description of what those would look like?
Sure. So some of them do have the cost reimbursements, which would be you writing down your activity and milestones and then kind of pricing it out. And then USAID will reimburse based on you hitting that milestone and the date that you propose to hit the milestone.
Mm-hmm.
And is ASU okay with that?
I've seen them before. I don't think that it's preferred, just like anything else. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, there are 3 types: firm, fixed fee, time and materials, and cost plus. So, it depends. And now some of them are coming out in these big IDIQs with all 3 possibilities underneath them.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not preferred, but not impossible. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Go ahead.
So when people are visiting Washington, which we think is a great opportunity when they're doing some of their research or doing some other work, and sometimes people will just show up in our office, that's not the most effective way, because sometimes they're going and presenting at an event that we can actually invite the client to if they're going, and there's nothing better than having our client go and see ASU presenting at another event. Secondly, we can set up meetings with partners that might want to put them on a bid, or the client themselves, because we have that beautiful building, and so we can actually create events around faculty coming, but that's really useful if we know ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that might be useful, getting back to that partnering discussion, if you are looking for a sub-role to a prime, again, just reiterating that we always encourage people to start early and to reach out to ASUID to start those conversations. And they happen in all different forms, but one good way of doing it might be reaching out to ASUID, working with them to identify a few different partners to approach who would be strong partners to win a bid. then drafting that solicitation statement, or the capability statement, sending that off, and then you'd actually schedule a few phone calls where you would talk through what your role would look like. It would kind of be a negotiation, discussion back and forth. There's always room for follow-up questions from both sides. And then that would eventually result in either a pre-teaming or a teaming agreement where you're essentially agreeing to work with this team on a specific scope of work, though those scopes can sometimes be pretty broad in the early teaming stages. And then you would get more and more specific as you get closer to the release date of the solicitation or once the solicitation comes out. So it can be manageable. It can just kind of be these phone calls and conversations that happen. It's not this big scary thing where you have one shot to get it and that's it. Any other questions at all? Yeah, go ahead.
Is most of the funding broad agency or countries? Sorry. Is most of the funding broad agency or country specific?
Anne, I'm going to toss this one to you. So what I've seen is most of the solicitations that we apply to come from the country offices. But Anne, I think you might be able to give a little bit more of a comprehensive answer.
That's a really good question, and I'd say they're both. Some of them come out of those sectors, and they have offices in Washington, and so they set up global procurement mechanisms that then the missions can buy into. So there will be some that are, I would say the majority come from the field, but you might actually have to bid into a Washington office. And then there are some very interesting Washington procurements like the Global Lab and training programs where we could actually do a lot of the training on some things, but those are out of the global office.
Yeah, it looks like something online. Yes, we have a question from online. I've heard that faculty and staff can apply for funding to travel to DC for meetings and events related to a funding opportunity. Is that true, and how do faculty and it ended?
That is true. And I'm going to toss this one to Faye to give you the details on how to do it.
So on funding.asu.edu, under internal limited submissions, there's an internal button where you can find all the solicitations for internal competitions. This particular program is called TRIPS, TRIPS. So even if you go to funding.asu.edu and put in the search bar TRIPS, it should pop up the current solicitation. It's usually updated every year. It is open. There are some requirements that you have to prepare an abstract, who you're going to go see, and then report back. And I think there's some restrictions on how much they fund, but it will definitely defray the cost. And we encourage everyone to take advantage of that. It is a KED service. KED does provide that funding for you. Mm-hmm. And TRIPS, TRIPS. Peter, Sam.
Yeah. And then another kind of difference another way that USAID can be different than other more typical federal sponsors for universities. With NSF, NIH, other typical sponsors, you might be talking to your program officer a lot to get details on the solicitations that'll be coming out. That doesn't really happen with USAID as much. The conversations that you're going to be having most frequently will actually be with those partner organizations. So that's just one major difference. You don't really call up a program officer with USAID. When you have questions, there's usually a set period of time once the solicitation is live to submit questions. They collect them all, they answer them all, and that's really your only shot. So it's a lower level of communication with the program officers there. All right. Any other questions? Can I do a quick scan of who has done work with USAID before? In the room or online? I have a few people? Okay. So most people are looking for opportunities. That's a good thing. That's a great thing. Anyone online?
Looks like a few people are responding.
Okay. So we do have a fair number of faculty, again, across campus who have kind of found these really niche roles where they are oftentimes subs to implementers that are headquartered in DC, and they'll come on and they'll play those subject matter expert roles. They do a lot of training, they do a lot of activity design, so it can be a really great way to connect with those organizations. And I would say that the researchers that we have, there is some opportunity to still publish off of the work. It's not quite the same as publishing off of NSF or NIH work, again, because it is very implementation focused, very applied, but there are still opportunities to do that. Yeah. All right. Okay. No more comments. All right, one last call for questions. Otherwise, we will go ahead and let you go. We will be up here if you have any follow-ups that you want to talk one-on-one about. But thank you guys for attending. We hope you can make the December 4th session as well. It'll be a little bit of a deeper dive. So, thank you.